Well, friends and colleagues, welcome back to the Bold by Choice podcast. I'm your colleague, Vashaunta Harris, and this season, Someone Has to Decide is about governance choices that shape what becomes possible for all of our students in all of our communities. And today, we're talking about the future of board governance and what happens when education changes and evolves a little bit faster than our governance practices do. Our guest, Kathy Smith, CEO and founder of EdVision LLC Education Consulting. Kathy has seen public education from nearly every seat, from being a teacher and a district's leader, administrator, philanthropic advisor, policy strategist, consultant, and my favorite, board member. And yes, she's one of our newest board members here at the National Charter Schools Institute. So we're pumped for that too. And so we're excited that Kathy is here with us today. We're going to talk about governance and frameworks. But before we dive in, I want to really get to the person behind this work. So, Kathy, what early experiences most shaped your understanding of the public education responsibility that adults carry for students?
Thank you, Vashaunta, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'd say my first experience in that vein was when I was a teacher, a high school English teacher, and I chose to do at what we categorize as at-risk student population. So special ed identified, but mainstreamed, adjudicated, chronic discipline referrals, things like that. And so if you look at the mission of school districts everywhere in the country then and now, there's some version of we teach them all. You know, we teach everyone. And when I showed up for my first day of work, I was handed a stack of Scope magazines and said, "This is your curriculum." I thought it was a joke.
Oh.
I said, "Well, where are the other materials that the other English teachers, high school English teachers use?" And I was told, "Well, your kids can't handle that." In addition to that, you know, our students were often expelled because they had too many tardies. They were counseled to go and drop out and get their GED instead. And so I learned the hard lesson that we teach all might really mean we teach all who fit into our administratively convenient model. Unfortunately, that was true then, and in many cases, as everyone knows, it's true today.
And can you take us to that moment, like you're walking into your first day, you're facing your students. How did that land for you when you were faced with, hey, I've got, I don't know, 25, 30 kiddos in my room, and I have this adult responsibility to show up for them, like today, you know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I determined, you know, from the first day, that we were not going to dumb down the curriculum. So, you know, this is a senior class, and and these kids have had years of disappointment and failure. And so I talked with them and said, we are going to work hard in here. And if you stay with me, I will work as hard as you do. And at the end of this, you'll be ready to graduate. And so we were very intentional about picking those materials and giving those kids confidence that they could do something that anybody else could do.
Kathy, talk to me about walking into that experience and being handed inadequate resources. Like, did you feel like you're on your own?
Oh, absolutely, I did. Absolutely, I did. You know, the message to me was just try to get through this year. You know, you're going to have problems. These kids are going to drive you crazy, but if you can just get them through, and that was not the mission of the school district, and that was not what I intended to do.
Well, that's not the brand of Kathy Smith. So you've taken on a lot of other seats from there, right? To the boardroom, to advising philanthropy. What have you learned in seeing education from all those seats and from your original view as a teacher? And here you are with serve them all, but you can kind of counsel them out and not take care of them.
Well, I mean, I think that I feel very fortunate that in all those seats that I had, it gave me the experience view of being directly impacted by board action or inaction. Sometimes the inaction was just as devastating as action. And so it taught me the importance of board governance of being bold, of being innovative, but also having the responsibility of care for that organization to make sure that it thrives and fulfills the mission every day.
Well, we love hearing bold with Bold by Choice, but there's a difference between a board member and a board. And obviously, you know that well, but talk us through into our audience. What's the duty of a board member and what's the duty of a board? And how do you make sure that your teachers don't experience what you did that first day?
Yes. A board member, I believe very strongly, a board member should be chosen very intentionally. A board should be diverse backgrounds and skill sets so that you have seats at the table that are important to different aspects of the organization where you belong as a board member. So as a board member, I would have certain strengths that I could lend to the team as we were talking through strategic direction and compliance and all those kinds of things. But I wasn't the only say, and that's the way it should be. Others had skills and experiences in other parts that were very important for that. So my job as a board member would be to lend my skills and experiences to the conversation so that we could collectively make the best decisions on behalf of the organization.
I love that because if everybody's thinking the same thing, somebody's not thinking. And that's where board members bring a diversity of perspective, views, opinions, but collectively, the board votes with one voice through its actions, and that's how things should roll in the school.
Absolutely.
Kathy, I don't know if I shared this when you and I were catching up the other day. I too share in the role as a board member for a school in South Carolina. And one of the things we've been talking about as we've started the school year is we've got to prepare for what our leader evaluation looks like. And I find in this moment, there's this tension that comes up. You're the support person to the leader, right? The board is, and the individual board members are, depending on our expertise and how we can support that leader. And we also have to hold that leader accountable. And I think there's a lot of tension there, especially when we really personally like the leader. So can you talk with us about how you've experienced that tension and how you've navigated that on boards that you serve on?
Yes, and that is often true, where the board members love the leader. Often the leader actually founded the organization or helped it grow significantly. So there's also that factor of respect and deference in some cases. But really, sometimes boards go a little, and excuse the term, overboard on that, because they do have a duty of care and a responsibility to the mission to make sure that that you're being supportive of that leader or that team of leaders, depending on who you're evaluating. And so that you can provide the support needed as the organization grows. Not everybody has every skill set that's always needed. So in an approach to think about how can we support this leader to carry out the work, the expanded work, the change in the work, while at the same time pointing out and constructive criticism in terms of these are the things that we really need to make sure that we have covered, and making that leader understand that it's okay to have help. It's okay to have technical assistance and others that can help you in this, because when leaders get spread too thin, they don't do anything well.
Mm-hmm. Can you take us into an example or pull out a story from your experience? What did an accountability moment look like or sound like for you and a leader that you were serving?
So in one foundation leader I was working with from a foundation board, we were starting into investments in program-related investments from the foundation. We gave, straight for a long time transactional grants, and then wanted to move into more leveraged funding under the program-related investment arm. And so that was something that leader didn't have any background or experience. So we wanted to intentionally add folks to the board as those positions came open, particularly to make sure that we had people with background and experience in that. And then also providing coaching for that leader so that he could get up to speed very quickly on what that is. How do you approach others to leverage that funding? Those kinds of things. He just hadn't had any experience in that at that point.
Absolutely. I appreciate you like taking us into that real story. And I love the pull out of coaching and how boards can leverage that as a support tool as we're guiding our leaders along the way. Um, I also see boards deal with moments of pressure. That can look like oftentimes leadership transitions, right? A leader is ready to take on a new challenge. And so you're left with this moment of, we've had this wonderful person, and now we've got to decide what to do about the search for the next person. Or it could be in moments of conflict with schools, like maybe parents are really upset about something, or maybe there's something going on with the teachers and the team, and the board may not have been aware and they become aware. And so now we've got to deal with these tensions. And so, from your experience, what does it look like for the boards to engage in these tensions and help solve for whatever that challenge is? What's the board's real role in that?
Yes. So I had an experience from my philanthropy chair. Years ago in our region, we had companies that were growing very rapidly, and they were trying to recruit young professionals into the region. But we essentially at that time had one preschool center that was performing very well, and many that weren't, and they were getting lots of citations, so they couldn't even add seats. And the pinch point for businesses, for the area businesses, we can't recruit professionals if they can't feel good about where their children come as they work. And so, as a foundation representative, I went to the executive director of the high performing center, but they had a wait list as long as your arm, and said, "We've got this great idea, and we're willing to put in lots of resources, us and an area of businesses, to franchise you. Let's just put one of you in every town, and then we can solve for this capacity problem." And so she said, "Well, let me go back and talk with my board." And, we were high-fiving each other. We thought we'd come up with the right solution. And she came back in a couple of weeks and she said, "Well, my board and I talked, and we would like to propose an alternative plan." And what they proposed was, she said, we know we're a high-performing center, but we don't want to be the only choice in the region. We want diversity of delivery, and we want lots of high-performing centers. So what we would like to do is build a training center and let these preschools come in free of charge, and we provide training and resources to ramp them up so that they can add seats. That was a great idea. In fact, it worked out because they were able to expand their seats, and in the first year of training, citations for these centers were cut by 50%. So I can imagine the board conversation, right?
Yeah.
In going with that tension where there's millions of dollars at stake here, we can franchise, but that board and the director had made the bold decision, and it was courageous because I can imagine the conversation. Well, if we turn them down, do we never get any resources? All of those conversations, and yet they made the right decision for families and students in the region, and even in inviting their competition to come in and serve families well.
Kathy, I love that because we talk about doing the right thing for the right reasons. And in those moments of pressure, it's where you really have to go to your values. And so having values by which you can behave and act and make decisions upon is, we talk about you don't need the Navy SEAL on a clear sunny day. You need them in the storm. That's when boards need those values. And I can just picture in your story of how that board took some sort of its values to come to this decision that actually wasn't necessarily in their best self-interest, but in the community's interest in a
Yes.
longer term play. And I think that's one of the joys of education. We're in the infinite game, right? This doesn't end in our lifetimes. We do the best we can and hand it on. So let me use that to transition to the future. All sorts of talk about the future and AI and technology and da 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 da. But one thing we know is it does really seem like the future is evolving more rapidly than it ever has, right? We're in a fast-paced world. We got all our tools and gadgets. What does that mean for governance?
I think that what I've watched on boards for many years is that um, people generally try to avoid conflict. And so in board meetings, you see people doing kind of regular things that are sort of check the box things that's a board responsibility, and not spending enough time in talking about the long view, as you described it earlier. And I think that's even become more relevant today because of the speed at which things are changing. Um, Boards need to look at what is happening, follow those trends, and address those proactively before something happens where you have to address it reactively. And so that's something that I think boards really need to think about in restructuring, maybe even board meetings where there are some of those check of the box issues could be done, remotely, or, they could get some of that out of the way so that there's more time in the meetings for strategic discussions and really addressing those things that are fast moving in the education world.
Yeah, it's really interesting with our work with boards to take them to Covey's habits, right? And that begin with the end in mind and be proactive are two hallmarks. And so much of what we see in boards is reacting to things that already happened or getting reports from the past. And so how do they protect time to be proactive and think about what's coming? And more importantly, how to position the board and the school to be able to serve students and families and educators in this ever-changing environment. And people say ever-changing all the time, but we really have unleashed this era of choice. And there is, in many places, becoming a very robust competitive educational marketplace, which seems like governing has to evolve and be more responsive than it maybe has had to in the past.
That's absolutely right. I mean, with more competition, boards have to now manage the balance between innovation and care and duty of your organization to make sure that it doesn't either stagnate or grow too rapidly, which would make you ineffective in all the things you do. And so they have to run that balance of how do we expand and innovate, and how can we be the choice in our district or our region without harming our school or departing from our mission.
So you've done so many things with boards, from serving on them to serving them. If a board said to you today, Kathy, how much time should we spend on the future versus kind of safeguarding what we are? How would you help them think through that?
I truly believe that they need to spend the majority of their time on the future. Just because there is more proactive planning that's going to be required for that, and more safeguards that they could put into place that will help them not have to deal with those after it happens kind of scenarios. And so, in my view, future planning will help you also avoid some of those critical and crisis moments that happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition. As we talk about new realities, schools and districts are facing the presence of AI, additional needs that students have. The mental health space is becoming more and more a place where folks are like, all right, we need a little bit more for our students to support here. And there are more tools to do it. There are more clear workforce expectations. So we're now talking about, are we truly equipping students for the workforce they are going to be entering versus the ones we entered, right? And that looks a little different in some ways. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, which reality that we're facing, students, teams of teachers, students, and principals, that boards may be underestimating. They may not be paying enough attention to.
I think boards do not pay enough attention to the long view sometimes. There's so many things going on in schools and districts. You have to deal with if you have maintenance issues with your buildings. You have to deal with personnel issues. You have to deal with whether the budget whether the state is reducing or increasing your student per pupil and what you do with that. And it really prevents them in some ways from thinking about how do we, and to me, and that's the most important thing, right? How do we make sure that our students are prepared for the future? And so that's why I would encourage boards to have maybe different or more streamlined conversations about those, I'll call it daily business kinds of things, and spend more time with each other and planning for the future. And how do we assure that all of our students are going to be served well and prepared in whatever they choose after high school?
And in that vein, do you have an example conversation that maybe you've had or you've witnessed a leader have with their board where they made that conscious decision to say, hey, we're going to actually spend some time on looking ahead or forecasting, as some may say?
Yes, I've attended some board meetings, particularly that I thought were interesting, of some of the more forward-looking superintendents, for example, when more school choice was brought into their district. You might imagine, there's a variety of reactions that superintendents and school boards have
Yeah, I can
when
think of a
choice is
few of
brought
those.
in. Could think of a few of those. I've been in those meetings. But I also sat in a meeting where I really admired the superintendent when he addressed the board when charters were being approved for his district. And he said, if we don't start acting now to get ready for the school choice and competition, we are going to lose. We need to think ahead in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. What does our school district look like now, and how does it look differently than what it looks like today? And that served him well.
Kathy, let's dig into that tension, right? We want boards to be proactive and forward looking, and yet they also are public stewards. They got fiduciary responsibilities, they've got risk management. Um, and in the reality of today's marketplace, enrollment issues drive revenue. And
Yes.
so if you're not doing certain things and your enrollment starts to dip, you've got compounding issues. How does a savvy board navigate those tensions?
I think that boards need to look at trends, set up performance trends that they need to watch for, um, you know, student achievement, enrollment, changes for a variety of reasons in the neighborhood or in our parent population and our student population. And some of those things can actually change pretty rapidly. And if we can follow those trends and be proactive about planning ahead for if this happens, we have it covered here, then again, you don't have as much having to react to something that, once that de-escalation starts or escalation starts, depending on what's going on, reacting to something in crisis never is the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, absolutely. Battle by fire, right?
Yes.
Thinking about board composition. A lot of charter schools are somewhere between 5 and, let's just say, 13 members. What kind of skills, abilities, characteristics would you be looking for in the ideal board?
I've heard a lot of and listened to a lot of charters that were starting up, and they talk about the skill sets to the authorizer, whoever that authorizer is, whether it's a state board or a state authorizer or university, about as they're applying to be a charter, on the people that they're looking for to be on their boards. And they have good answers in terms of, we need someone in finance, we need somebody who's good in legal, we need somebody who's good in facilities. All of those things being covered. But often they miss that there should be an educator on the board. Maybe not from their district, or somebody who's had those lived experiences in education, because that can add a component to a board that is very valuable. And so, covering all those things, I think, is important. And again, then the board can act as a team with all those strengths to make sure the organization is healthy.
Absolutely. And, we have this whole topic where we're like, we know our current state is changing, which means our future state is rapidly evolving. Charter schools have been designed. Our whole creation was to be an innovative model alongside what many folks call kind of traditional school. And so there's this responsibility to continue to be innovative, to continue to have the right people in the right seats, and to develop cultures that cultivate spaces where those missions can be met, right? So students are thriving, and teachers and the team that supports those students are able to do the thing they have to do, right? I call it my jam. When I can do my jam, that's when I'm thriving, and everyone gets the best of me. And so when we put all that together, and we know that we want our spaces to remain very, very student centered, what are some ways that our boards can continue to help their leaders to stay student centered and do all of those other things, right? Innovation, good culture, help students thrive. How do you advise boards to put all of those pieces of ingredients into the recipe?
I think that boards, it helps for them not to be completely separate from the communities they serve. And so I encourage boards to go to community events or, things that where they can hear from the community in terms of their needs and things that are happening. Also stay in close contact with others in the community, the business sector, the chamber, things like that. So they can kind of get a pulse on what the community needs are as they emerge. And then that helps them also, that keeps them grounded when they hear from parents and kids and community members in terms of what's been successful and what's needed. That helps keep them grounded as they continue to lead with innovation and due diligence in terms of governance.
All right. So let's say we're sitting down with a board, and they will be the board of a school that opens in the year 2040. What's one piece of advice you'd give that future board?
I would say to that future board to make sure that you keep up with the trends and you're aware of those trends, that you are thoughtful about how those trends intersect with what your students need, what your community needs, and what the future of job growth is. Also, though, paying close attention to making sure students have skill sets that will allow them to enter that training. A lot of people ask me if I had one thing that I wished that schools would all do very well. I say it's fourth grade reading proficiency, because that's where, if you don't have that, we know statistically what happens if you're not on target by fourth grade. You probably won't catch up in your entire lifetime. So think about the entry point and how important it is to make sure those skill sets are solid, and then you can build from there on what's needed for the future.
Kathy, as a new board member at the Institute, every board member will agree with you. That strong start is just such a door opener for all. And that reading proficiency at fourth grade is a marker that's just, the research is clear, is such a gatekeeper. I want to talk about boards being credible and trustworthy, and charters and chartering being worthy of the public trust. How do you see that, and how do you think they can lean into that more effectively?
You see the credibility of boards around the public facing operations they have, and how they handle the mission, and how they handle the care of the mission statement of the school, right? And I think if audience members or those in the community can see that they're being very deliberate, but yet innovative and bold in the way that they govern the school, even if they don't agree with every single decision that board makes, they respect their efforts, and they can see the progression of the planning and how that might best fit and serve the students in the district.
Yeah, that you keep coming back to the mission, which I love. In our words, it's the promise, right? What do we promise the community? What do we promise our students, our teachers, and are we living that promise? It's just beautiful. Let's transition to a boardroom moment. So, Kathy, you're in a boardroom. All of our audience is the public. They're watching, they're listening, they're, what's the decision going to be? And they need to name something out loud about the future. What would you name about the future that every board should be paying attention to?
I think every board should be paying attention to AI. AI does affect just about every facet of what they can do, but also it has great promise for training, for making sure that students their curriculum could be customized to address all of those various and diverse needs they have. But AI can also, as you know, be used as a great harm. And so boards need to proactively look at how we employ AI and then what guardrails do we use to assure that that students don't become victims of use of AI. And I think that's a deep conversation. And I could see a moment where you don't pay attention to it. You don't pay attention to it. Many of the phrase that or the word that a lot of boards like to use is we'll monitor this for a while, right? Well, monitor means we're not going to talk about it right now, right? And so if you don't proactively think about these things, then you're more likely to come to that moment again of crisis where something really serious has happened and you haven't really decided how you're beforehand, how you're going to handle it.
I really like that because what I think the message is to boards and board members is you have to anticipate the future.
Yes.
And you might like it, you might not like it, but it's coming. And you've got a responsibility, right? A stewardship responsibility to create possibilities, to handle risk, prepare your team, but really make sure that you're living your mission throughout all of that. And that's, it requires forethought and anticipation and proactive and all those words we'd use. But that really is a gift that board members can bring to the board and to the organization as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, I could see a situation where they sort of avoid talking about that and then something more devastating happens. And so the reaction is, we're just going to put kids in a bubble and we're not going to use AI or allow it in any way. Well, that's not real. And that's really not what necessarily serves students best.
Which is a great segue into our challenge for listeners today. So, listeners, before your next board meeting, we challenge you all to identify at least one future reality that your board may not be fully ready and fully prepared to govern through yet. It may be artificial intelligence, as we're talking about right now. It may be student mental health, workforce readiness, enrollment shifts, public trust, facility challenges, et cetera, et cetera. So bring that question to the table and ask your team, ask your fellow board members, what decision, what discipline, or what conversation do we need to have? And have it now so that the school or schools that you are governing are not just protecting what exists, but are truly preparing students for the world ahead, the world that they will be entering ahead. And if this episode helps you think about that and help you think differently about board governance, that you also share this episode with your fellow team members, with your school leader, even with your authorizer. So let's help each other because we go further together as we are shaping the future of public education.
And that's why at the Institute, we call it governing for greatness. We don't want boards governing for mediocrity or complacency. And greatness is a mindset. And it requires discipline. It requires boldness. It requires humility. It also requires curiosity and thinking about the future and getting positioned to be proactive about it and not reactive. And that's what great boards do. And that's what great board members bring to a board. And governance is not just the work of the board, it's the work of the leadership team. And so when you think of governance and the leadership that's necessary for the future, and then the work of the board itself of what it can make decisions on, that's the winning team that helps kids win, helps teachers win, and ultimately helps us all win because it gives us a better country and protects freedom.
Kathy, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
And listeners, thank you all for joining Bold by Choice. If you want to learn even more about board governance and tools and tricks for your practices, I encourage you to travel with us over to our website at nationalcharterschools.org. Head over to our board network session. We have plenty of resources for you there. And if you enjoyed this episode or others and you haven't subscribed, family, let's go ahead and commit. Hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on what's coming up ahead. Well, until then, stay bold by choice.